There were questions that hid in the cracks of time, questions no one dared to speak aloud, as if the air itself might shatter upon hearing them. What if everything we call protection was, in truth, an elegantly crafted prison? What if the love we believed to be our safe harbor was the quietest chain, pulling us toward a fate we never chose? And what if the person who promised to shield me from the world had, from the very beginning, been shielding the world from me? For a long time I avoided thinking about it. I preferred believing that some memories only gain power when we give them a name. But certain glances, when revisited, tell stories that should never be remembered. But there are moments in life when the past returns like an insistent whisper, like a cold touch on the back of your neck, demanding that you turn around and face it. And when you finally do, you realize you always knew, always felt that something was profoundly wrong in what you called destiny. Maybe because destiny is never simple. It is never just a single line drawn out. It is a tangle of choices, promises, silences, and wounds kept deep within the soul. It is an invisible pact we make without noticing, and sooner or later, it demands its price. Mine began with a love soft, deep, almost sacred, and ended with the revelation of an enemy I could have never imagined facing. What if I told you that it all began on a silent night when the wind seemed to carry too many secrets? That even before I understood what fear was, I already sensed that one day it would come to collect its due? And what if I confessed that deep within me, I always knew I was being watched by eyes that mistook tenderness for possession, protection for surveillance? Life is like that. It whispers warnings, but we love ignoring them. We love believing that love saves, that promises redeem, that memories free us. But not always. There are memories that imprison, there are promises that condemn, there are loves that destroy. And when I realized that, it was already too late. The mansion where everything happened still stands tall, silent, absorbing the echoes of what took place within its ancient walls. Its hallways hold too many stories, too many photographs, too many shadows. And for a long time, I was just another shadow moving between it and the world, believing I was protected, believing he was protecting me. But he was not my protector. He was the secret the mansion had been trying to tell me. And this story is about the day I finally listened. Now, if you have courage, I invite you to come with me, to open the heavy door, smell the bitter scent of old wood, and let the light get lost in the long hallway stretching ahead. The mansion doesn't like strangers, but it tolerates those who listen. And you, from this moment on, are about to hear what it whispers. Take a deep breath. The door is opening. Welcome to the beginning. The mansion rose on the hill like a silent guardian overlooking the small town that curled beneath it. It was impossible to ignore, even from afar. Its dark windows resembled eyes that never slept, and its tall walls seemed to hold too many stories for a single place. Those who saw it for the first time might say it was just an old estate, the inheritance of a wealthy family that had dissolved over time. But those who knew it like I did knew that it breathed, that it watched, that it remembered. The protagonist, let us call her Eleanor, arrived there still young, carried by the promise of a new life. He had brought her there. He, the man who claimed to be her safe harbor, her companion, her confidant. A man whose presence seemed to fill the entire house, even when he was absent. A man with a calm voice, a firm touch, and intentions always inexplicably clear to clear. Helena believed him, or perhaps she needed to believe him, because the mansion was too big, too quiet, and the world outside it seemed even more terrifying. At first, everything seemed like a dream. There were bright afternoons, the scent of warm tea, light footsteps echoing through the hallways, and the comforting sense that nothing could reach her there. But little by little, small details began to appear, almost imperceptible, almost innocent, as if the mansion were testing her attention. Footsteps that weren't hers. The attic door always slightly ajar, even when he swore he had closed it. Old portraits that seemed to shift places, a familiar perfume in the air when she woke, even though the room was supposedly empty. Whispers that blended with the wind, but never happened when he was around. Helena tried to ignore it all, but the mansion wouldn't allow it. It had its own peculiar way of bringing its secrets closer, as if saying, "Look more closely, you need to see." And it was always in moments of calm, in the silence of morning or in the dusk that wrapped the house like a veil, that Helena felt with uncomfortable precision that she was not alone. At first, she blamed it on the size of the house, on the echo of her own thoughts, on the childish fear of spaces too large. But there was something deeper there, something old, something that watched. And yet, every time he appeared with his soft smile and protective gaze, all of Helena's doubts dissolved. His presence muted the house's noises, silenced its warnings, erased her unease. He made everything seem normal. He made her believe the problem was her, not the mansion. But the mansion knew the truth. And sooner or later, It would reveal everything. For now though, Helena still walked through the hallways like someone unaware she was being guided toward the center of a labyrinth. And meanwhile, something or someone watched her from the shadows of the staircase. The staircase leading to the attic began behind a simple, almost discreet door at the end of a narrow corridor. Helena had walked past it countless times, always quickening her steps as if the floorboards grew colder in that spot. The door, however, seemed to call to her, not urgently, but patiently, as if it knew that sooner or later she would give in. That night, the wind blew differently. The branches of the garden trees scraped against the windows, producing a repetitive, insistent sound. The whole mansion seemed to breathe deeper, as if anticipating something. Helena didn't know why her feet carried her to the end of the hallway. She only felt the impulse. The corridor was darker than usual, and the air smelled faintly of old dust and damp wood. The attic door wasn't fully closed. A thin ribbon of shadow leaked through the crack, as if the darkness inside had its own density. Helena touched the doorknob, the metal cold against her skin. For a brief instant, she felt the house fall silent. No ticking from the old clock in the foyer, no whisper of curtains drifting in the wind, only pure, whole silence, wrapping itself around her. When she turned the knob, the door opened with a long, lazy creak, like a sigh escaping from something that had slept for a very long time. The air from the attic met her heavy, dusty, with a faint smell of old paper and forgotten fabric. The staircase was narrow and steep, its wood complaining anxiously at any weight. Helena climbed step by step, her heart beating faster. It wasn't exactly fear. It was something undefined, an anxious expectancy, as if she were about to face something she could never unsee again. As she ascended, the dim light of the hallway faded behind her, and the darkness thickened, until only the thin glow filtering through a high, dusty window above remained as a point of reference. At the top, the attic opened before her like a world of its own. Furniture covered with yellowed sheets formed strange silhouettes, like figures frozen mid-dance. Boxes stacked in corners, old suitcases bound with leather straps, frames leaning against slanted walls, books on crooked shelves, some with spines eaten away by time. The air felt colder there, as if the attic refused to accept the warmth from the rest of the house. Helena walked slowly, the floor groaning under her steps. Dust rose in little whirlwinds with every movement, dancing through the pale light like tiny faceless ghosts spinning around her. Despite being full of objects, the attic felt empty, as if everything had been abandoned in a hurry, without farewell. She dusted off a covered table and lifted the sheet, revealing an antique sideboard covered in delicate carvings and thin mark scratches. Time insisted on collecting. On it was a row of silver picture frames, all facing the wall. A strange arrangement. Who stores photos like that, staring into the darkness? Curiosity grew. Helena turned the first frame around. A couple, dressed from another era, posed in front of the same mansion, its paint fresh, its garden well tended. Their faces were faded, bleached by time. The second frame showed a larger group, stern expressions, as if bearing the weight of the house had drained part of their warmth. But the third frame, that was when something truly unsettled her. The glasses, the shape of the jaw, the way the man held a glove in his hands. There was an uncanny resemblance to him, not identical, but enough to feel like an echo through generations. A chill ran down her spine. Time folded in on itself. The image silently suggested that nothing in that mansion was truly new. She tried dismissing it as coincidence. Families often shared features. Genetics repeated patterns like a stubborn refrain, but her intuition ached, whispered that it was more than that. She walked toward a pile of empty frames leaning against a wall. Behind them, she found a wooden box secured with an old, decorative lock. The box was small but carried an odd sense of importance. The wood was dark, well preserved despite the dust almost lovingly maintained. Helena ran her fingers across it. A strange déjà vu struck her, as if she had touched that box before, as if it recognized her. Without thinking too much, she forced the locket, gave in easily like it had never meant to keep anyone truly out. When she opened the lid, the smell of aged paper and dry ink intensified. Inside were a bundle of letters tied with a worn ribbon, a hard-covered notebook darkened with age, and several loose photographs face down. She picked up the notebook. Elegant handwriting filled the pages, firm, steady, defying the decades. Words drifted past her eyes. Promises, protection, debt, choice, sacrifice. It read like fragments of a pact someone had made with destiny itself. The letters felt more personal. They were dated decades before her birth, yellowed but resilient, the ink slightly faded yet heavy with emotion. The photographs, still face down, seemed to carry a weight of their own, as if turning them would change the temperature of the room. She hesitated. The air felt heavier, colder. She felt watched not spiritually, but with a disturbingly human attentiveness. She flipped the first photograph, a woman standing in the mansion garden, light dress, loose hair, serene expression, the same familiar posture of the head, the same gentle way of holding her hands, the same shoulders. The more Helena looked, the more she recognized the silent mirror. Then she turned the second photograph. The same woman stood beside a man, and that man could have been mistaken for him. Not a vague resemblance, something deeper. The way he positioned himself, the slight tilt of his torso toward the woman, the firm and watchful gaze at the camera, always assessing everything around him. Helena's stomach tightened. The date scribbled in the corner made no sense. It was as if time had torn itself open, stitching together what was never meant to be connected. The photo suggested that the story had happened before, that something was repeating. A soft sound broke her trance. The wood of the stairs groaned, as if a small weight shifted on one of the steps. Helena turned quickly toward the attic door but saw only darkness and the thin beam of light from the hallway below. Silence returned, but now it felt alert, like a held breath. It was the woman again, Valentina, but this time she wasn't alone. Beside her stood the same man from the second photograph in the attic, the one who could be mistaken for him, only younger, stiffer, darker. But there was something different about this photo, something Helena hadn't seen in the others. Behind the couple, in the left corner of the image, there was a subtle presence, a barely perceptible shape, hidden behind a tree, as if it were just a camera glitch, a misplaced shadow. However, on looking closer, Helena could make out the vague outline of a human figure, an indistinct face, watching the couple from a distance. There was a date written on the back of the photo, August 19th. No year, just the date, but Helena recognized the day. It was the same day she and he had moved into the mansion. The weight of that coincidence, or what felt like far more than coincidence, hit her hard. The sense of repetition was no longer just a vague discomfort. It was almost a painful certainty, as if she were living in the shadow of another story, an echo that refused to be forgotten. Keeping the photo with her, Helena quickly left the room, closing the door behind her, trying to ignore the waves of chills growing stronger along her skin. She didn't yet know what any of it meant. She didn't know if it was coincidence, fate, or a warning from the house. But something inside her had begun to stir an ancient intuition, a silent alarm that was growing louder. That afternoon he walked into the hall with firm, calm steps. As always, he greeted her with a gentle smile and asked how her day had been. His eyes passed over every detail around them, the curtains, the flower arrangement, The position of the furniture with the precision of someone who memorizes every last aspect of a space. Helena had noticed this habit of his long ago, but had never given it much thought. Now, however, it seemed like part of a pattern she was only beginning to understand. He made a light comment about how the flowers looked more beautiful that afternoon. Helena agreed quickly, trying to hide the tension in her voice. He studied her face more closely than usual, asked if something was bothering her. She said no, but the silence between them, in that instant, weighed like an old door about to give way. Helena wanted to show him the photograph, ask who Valentina was, question the unsettling resemblance between them, but something held her back. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was the growing sensation that uncovering the truth might cost more than she imagined. That night, Helena took a long time to fall asleep. The house was restless, as if every board creaked with intention, as if the wind carried whispers that weren't just the wind. And in the dense silence of the early hours, when her eyes finally began to grow heavy, she heard a sound coming from upstairs, a slow dragging, like someone moving something heavy. From inside the attic, the same attic she had visited the night before, the same attic whose padlock she now realized clearly might never have been accidentally broken. Helena stayed perfectly still in bed, eyes wide open in the thick darkness. The sound in the attic continued slow, dragging, methodical. It wasn't the usual creaking of old wood, nor the noise of wind pushing the tiles. It was too precise, too intentional, as if something were being moved from one side to another, over and over, as part of a silent ritual. For a moment, Helena held her breath. The feeling of being watched returned with force, as if the very shadow of the house leaned over her, waiting for her reaction. Her heartbeat was so loud it seemed to fill the room. A cold spread along her arms, a cold that didn't come from the temperature, but from inside, from the instinctive understanding that something was being prepared above her, directly above her head. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was awake, sorting something out, looking for something, but it didn't make sense. He was far too methodical to move anything around in the middle of the night, and the attic, he rarely went up there. He always said it was a useless space, full of worthless old junk. Why would he be there now? And if it wasn't him, then who? The noise stopped abruptly. Absolute silence took over the house, so deep that Helena could hear her own blood pulsing in her ears. She waited, maybe for seconds, maybe for minutes. It was impossible to measure time in that suspended darkness. Then a new sound caught her attention. Footsteps. Soft footsteps, almost imperceptible, coming from the hallway, slow, measured. Approaching, Helena felt the urge to get up, lock the door, hide, but she couldn't move a single finger. It was as if the mansion had laid an invisible hand over her body, pinning her to the bed, telling her to listen, to not miss that moment. The footsteps reached the front of her bedroom door, stopped. The silence that followed was so intense it seemed to vibrate in the air. The doorknob didn't turn, no shadow appeared at the crack under the door, no voice called her name, only presence, heavy, silent. Helena squeezed her eyes shut, as if that could create a barrier between her and whatever was waiting outside. She didn't know how long she stayed, like that, minutes, hours, maybe an eternity. She only knew that, at some point, exhaustion finally overcame fear and her thoughts dissolved into a restless sleep. When she woke, the morning light slipped through the curtains like golden threads. The room was silent, calm, as if nothing had happened. She sat up slowly, trying to organize her memories of the night, but the sounds were too clear to be dreams. The presence outside the door was too vivid to be imagination. As she went downstairs for breakfast, she found everything immaculate, as always. The table set, the dishes shining, the soft smell of freshly baked bread filling the air. He was there, sitting with the same relaxed posture as always, leafing through a newspaper as if the world around him held no shadows at all. When he lifted his gaze and saw her, his smile was perfectly normal, or almost. There was something in his eyes that made her hesitate, a light that hadn't been there before, a quiet knowing. He commented on how peaceful the night had been and asked if she'd slept well. The question came wrapped in kindness, but carried something deeper, as if he were carefully probing what she knew. Helena replied that yes, she'd slept just fine. The lie came out smooth, automatic. He seemed satisfied. The morning unfolded with a disconcerting normality. He mentioned that he would be going out for a few hours to take care of personal matters. He didn't say exactly what. He rarely did. The mansion always seemed to know more about him than she did. As soon as he left, the atmosphere of the house changed. Small, distant sounds became clearer. The wind seeping through the cracks felt colder. Shadows once again began to stretch into the corners of the rooms, as if reaching toward Helena, inviting her or ordering her to move. The mansion seemed to be waiting for the right moment to call her again, and it did. This time, not to the attic, but to the second-floor hallway. Helena walked there, feeling a faint, almost physical tug guiding her steps. The house seemed to open a path for her, each door slightly ajar, each beam of light indicating where she should go. It was as if the mansion were fully assuming its role, making it clear it wasn't just a backdrop, it was witness, it was guardian, it was accomplice. At the end of the hallway, she noticed that the guest room door was open, a detail she immediately recognized as wrong. That room was rarely used. He always kept it closed, saying it was just an old, useless space, not worth occupying. Now, however, the door stood wide open. Helena stepped inside. The room looked intact, but charged with strange energy. A warm living sensation lingered in the space. She took a few steps toward the center of the room and noticed something on the vanity. An oval mirror, old, with a dark wooden frame, reflected the space with a slight distortion, and in front of it lay an object that had been there the last time Helena had visited the room months ago. The air grew denser, heavier, as if the room were too small to contain so many revelations at once. Something that never should have been awakened. Later that afternoon, as she approached the main door to get some fresh air, she found something in the entrance hall, a pale old envelope with her name written on the front. Rain started to fall hard, beating against the window panes like impatient hands trying to get in. The wind wrapped around the house's structure, whistling through hidden corners, producing a restless chorus. The lights flickered slightly, as if the bulbs shared Helena's doubts, sometimes steady, sometimes wavering. After dinner, he retreated to his office, as usual, to deal with his documents, his files, his neatly organized secrets. Helena knew that room was almost an extension of his mind. Everything there had a place, a purpose, a logic she did not share. He rarely allowed anyone to interfere with that space, and Helena, whether out of habit or conditioning, respected that boundary. Alone in the main room, she walked up to the large hallway mirror and looked at herself. There was something different in her own face. Maybe the way her eyes looked more alert, or the subtly tense expression. The necklace she'd found in the guest room remained tucked in her dress pocket, heavy as if it were made of stone instead of silver. The locket with the inscription seemed to grow warmer each time she thought of it, like a strange little heart beating against the fabric. Helena closed her eyes for a moment and tried to remember. She wanted to force her mind to reach further back than was comfortable, to search for memories beyond what was reasonable. She imagined herself arriving at the mansion for the first time. The suitcases, the smell of wood, his voice promising her a safe life there, far from any outside threat. But the more she tried, the more she felt something was missing. Like pages torn from a book, certain parts of her story seemed too curved, too smooth, without rough edges, as if they had been carefully polished. The sentence from the envelope returned, insistent, "It's time to remember." Night deepened. From the office door left slightly ajar, a thin strip of warm yellow light shone into the hall. Helena occasionally heard the soft sound of papers being turned, the faint creak of a chair, the discreet tap of a pen on paper. The mansion, in contrast, moved in more organic rhythms. The rain intensified, the wind changed direction, a tree struck some point on the facade with more force. And above everything, up there, the attic remained in complete silence, a dense, contained silence, as if holding back hidden breaths. That was when the lights flickered for the first time. It wasn't a normal fluctuation. For a few seconds, the electricity seemed to fail, plunging the house into an uncomfortable half-darkness, before returning with slightly less intensity, as if something were draining part of the energy. Helena felt her whole body react, somewhere between a startle and a strange recognition. This wasn't just a technical glitch. The mansion was responding to something. Soon after, as the old clock in the room struck the hour with heavy chimes, Helena heard a different sound. It came from the second-floor hallway, distant, muffled, but distinct. Something like an object rolling across the floor, stopping, and then being picked up by an invisible hand. The anxiety rose again, in waves. The urge to climb the stairs and check the source of the sound battled the desire to stay exactly where she was. Clinging to the false safety of the lit room, her heart, however, seemed more connected to the mansion than to reason. Before she realized it, Helena was already on the first step. With every step, the floor acknowledged her presence with a soft groan. The light from the ground floor faded behind her until only a dense half-darkness remained, cut by thin beams slipping through cracks under doors. The second-floor hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel, the walls narrow, the shadows clinging to the baseboards. The silence was complete now, as if the house had held its breath, waiting. That was when Helena saw it. On the floor, right in the center of the hallway, lay something small, faintly gleaming beneath a thin line of light coming from a distant window. A key, an old key, with delicate details on the bow, very similar in style to the padlock that had once protected the attic box. She approached slowly, the feeling of being watched intensifying with every step. When she bent down to pick up the key, a familiar scent filled the air around her, the same perfume as the flowers in the hall, the same that seemed to cling to the old letters. It was as if the fragrance was seeping out of the walls themselves. The key was warm to the touch, which made no sense at all. Helena closed her hand around it, feeling a strange comfort mixed with a deep fear. It was as if the mansion were handing her a choice. The key would fit somewhere, and the most obvious logic pointed to his office. That room that never fully opened to her, that space where his past and perhaps hers might be arranged in folders, shelves, and drawers. Just imagining it sent a sharp chill climbing up Helena's spine. Breaking into the office would mean breaking an unspoken rule, crossing a line that had never been crossed. But the envelope, the inscription on the pendant, the photographs, the shadow in the mirror, the footsteps in the attic, the sounds in the night, everything converged on the same point. She could no longer keep wandering through the inside of a labyrinth without finding its center. When she returned to the ground floor, she found the office door closed, as it always was when he was inside. Warm yellow light spilled from the gap at the bottom, carving a small bright rectangle into the hallway floor. The sound of the pen had stopped. The silence on the other side was absolute. For a few moments, Helena stood in front of the door with the key clenched in her hand, feeling the weight of all the choices she had made up to that point. The sense of love and protection that had once sustained her now seemed entwined with something darker. The gradual realization that she might never have been truly free inside that house, nor inside that bond. The mansion seemed to lean over her, waiting. The wind beat against the windows with growing force, as if it wanted to take part in the decision. What Helena did not yet know was that same night, something was about to happen inside the office, something that would not only justify the fear beginning to grow within her, but expand it beyond the point of no return, because soon, she would realize that the key in her hand didn't just open doors, it opened memories. Helena remained before the office door like someone staring into a fogged mirror, knowing there is something beyond it but unable to see clearly. The key in her hand seemed to throb faintly, as if it carried an inner vibration only she could feel. It was almost a summons, a silent urge, not a command, but an urgent invitation. An invitation to finally cross the most protected boundary of the house. She drew a deep breath, feeling the mansion's cold air fill her lungs, and, for an instant, almost stepped back. Part of her still wanted to believe that all of this was exaggeration, that the fear and the coincidences were just that, coincidences, fractures of the imagination fed by restless nights and old photographs. But another part, deeper and older, knew that truth rarely presents itself without a push. Helena turned the doorknob. It didn't open. The latch was locked. As always, the loneliness of that gesture, the immobile door between her and him, seemed to symbolize something larger. A barrier not just in wood and metal, but in the layers of silence they had built between themselves over time. She then raised the key. As she brought it closer to the lock, she noticed something strange. The key shouldn't fit there. It was far too old, too ornate. The door lock was modern, simple, contemporary. Nothing matched. And yet, as she approached the metal, she felt a slight pull like a magnetism, as if the key recognized its destination, and the destination recognized the key. With a dry, unexpected click, the door opened. Helena froze. The lock had yielded as if it had been made for that exact key, as if he or the house had been waiting for her to arrive there, that particular night, with that exact key in her hands. When she stepped inside, she realized the office was larger than it looked from the outside. The walls were paneled in dark wood, made to absorb light rather than reflect it. There was an imposing desk near the window, covered with papers arranged in neat, uniform piles. On a shelf to the right, books were lined up with calculated precision. Nothing was out of place. Nothing suggested chaos or improvisation. But the air was heavy, dense, filled with something that did not belong only to the present. In the middle of the office was an armchair turned toward the window, as if someone had been watching the darkness outside. Helena knew that. Moments earlier he had been sitting there, but now, the armchair was empty. His absence was unsettling, more frightening than his presence would have been. She closed the door behind her and, for an instant, felt as though she had been locked inside a vault of memories. The mansion seemed to hold its breath, attentive to the first step she would take in that forbidden territory. Helena walked up to the desk and examined the papers. She expected to find bills, formal documents, maybe old correspondence. But the first sheet she touched made her blood run cold. It was a newspaper clipping. The headline spoke of a disappearance. A name, a faded photograph. A young woman, Valentina. Helena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. That woman wasn't just someone from the house's past. She was someone whose story had been recorded unsilenced in the newspapers. Helena flipped through other clippings, all dated from decades earlier. Small notes about disappearances, always of young women, always connected to the region of the mansion or the nearby town. The dates stretched across decades, but there was a troubling pattern. The descriptions of the victims shared similar traits with one another, and with Helena: dark eyes, medium height, delicate features. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Along the sides of the desk, she found files catalogued with the same meticulous rigor he applied to everything in his life. Each folder had a name written in that same elegant handwriting, the same that appeared on the envelope, the pendant, the attic notebook: Valentina, Clara, Isabel. A line for names, for stories, for lives swallowed by silence. Helena opened the first folder, but the contents were more disturbing than she had imagined. Old photographs, unfinished letters, notes about habits, preferences, important dates. As if he had collected not just information about their lives, but about who they were, intimately, before they disappeared. The feeling of being studied took on a new meaning. The next folders contained more of the same, meticulous records. Some dates aligned with the time she herself had arrived at the mansion. There were repeated patterns, details too intimate to be coincidence. And then, at the very back of the drawer, she found the last folder. No name. Just a blank space. And inside, a recent photograph. Her photograph. Helena dropped the page as if she had touched something alive, something pulsing. The image showed her in the garden, exactly like the old photo of Valentina. The same pose, the same angle, the same setting, the same repetition. She staggered back a few steps, her stomach tightening in waves. The office seemed to close in around her like a maze folding over itself. Now she understood why the room had always been forbidden. Here lay the thread connecting all the stories and the place where hers was being written without her knowing. A sudden jolt ran through her when she heard the sound behind her, the office door closing. Helena spun around immediately. He was standing in the doorway. There was no clear expression on his face, no surprise, no anger, no discomfort, just absolute silence. A silence so solid it seemed to fill the space between them. He looked around the office for a few seconds, as if assessing the scene, as if every detail needed to be aligned before any words could be spoken. Helena felt her heart race. The key, still in her hand, trembled. The folders on the desk seemed to scream the truth. Even shut, he took a step inside. And then he finally spoke with a voice that was far too calm. "I knew you would find it." It was not an accusation. It was not surprise. It was a statement. A simple fact. Helena instinctively backed away, her entire body on alert. The mansion seemed to react along with her, though wood creaked. The windows shuddered with the wind, as if the environment itself were alive, attentive to that moment. He took another step. The way he looked at Helena inside that office seemed to rearrange the air itself. There was no desperation, no rushed justification, no sudden gesture. Helena felt her whole body respond with a nearly physical alarm. He spoke of choices, of protection, of inevitable circumstances. He told her she had lost important parts of her past. He spoke of a hospitalization, of feverish nights, of empty eyes. He mentioned worried doctors, uncertain prognoses. She couldn't say whether those memories were entirely true or shaped by his words, but they were there, and as they merged with the present, they created a paradoxical feeling. It seemed the mansion wasn't the beginning of anything, but the continuation of a story that had started long before, in another place, in another nearly erased life. He said he had brought her there to protect her, that the distance from the city, the isolation, the silence, and the predictable routines were ways of preserving her fragile mind. According to him, the outside world would be too harsh, full of triggers that could make her regress, lose herself again. In that version, the mansion was not a prison, it was a refuge. He was not a jailer, he was a guardian, and for a brief moment, Helena almost wanted to believe him. After all, there was a thread of truth in what he said. She felt, somewhere inside, that there really had been a period of confusion, of gaps, of emptiness. Poorly stitched memories of people who might have existed and then vanished, a name that surfaced and disappeared like smoke, an old pain, dulled but never entirely gone. The problem wasn't only in what he said, it was in what he didn't, because while he justified the mansion as protection, he did not explain the folders cataloging the lives of other women. He did not explain the clippings about disappearances. He did not explain the terrifying repetition of physical features, of dates, of poses in photographs. He did not explain why there was an unnamed dossier where Helena's image fit like the final piece of a puzzle. She began to realize, with an uncomfortable clarity, that he was building a narrative with strategic gaps. He told just enough to make himself seem indispensable. He left carefully placed blanks, as if he knew that her mind starved for answers would take it upon itself to fill in whatever was missing. The mansion, however, seemed unwilling to play that game. In the middle of his explanation, Helena remembered the envelope left in the hall, the short, sharp phrase written in his same handwriting, hinting that there was something to be remembered. She remembered the pendant with its inscription of ownership. She remembered the key left in plain sight in the hallway. Small gestures, small objects, all laid out like breadcrumbs across the floor of a labyrinth, inviting her to follow a specific path. What if it all hadn't been discovered by accident? What if the mansion was less a generous guardian of secrets and more a stage meticulously orchestrated by him? That question cut through Helena like a thin blade. She began to mentally step back, revisiting every detail of the last few days. The conveniently ajar attic door, the padlock that gave way far too easily, the photograph left on the floor of the forgotten room, the pendant on the vanity, the key shining alone in the hallway. None of it had the feel of improvisation. Everything reeked of intention. He didn't just present himself as a protector, he created situations in which the only possible conclusion was that she needed to be protected. The more she thought about it, the more the love that had once sustained her seemed to twist inside her, becoming something hybrid, contradictory. The bond was still there, deep connection built on years of living together, on gestures of care, on nights when he had been there when no one else was. But now that bond revealed another side, patient manipulation, subtle control, constant surveillance. The man she loved and trusted now appeared as someone who, from the very beginning, had shaped her world according to a script of his own. The part of Helena that still felt attached to him tried to interpret everything as excessive concern, as a desperate attempt not to lose her again. Maybe he was afraid. Maybe he had seen up close how much she had fallen apart in the past and, frightened, decided that the only way to prevent another collapse was to control every step she took. But the other part, the one the mansion had been slowly awakening, saw that there was more, that there was a repetition that could not be ignored, that he had done this before, that other women had occupied that place before her, in cycles that began with a promise of protection and ended in brutal silence. The folders on the desk did not lie. The dates did not lie. The newspaper clippings did not lie. Helena began to feel the presence of the others, even though she had never known them. It was as if Valentina, Clara, Isabel, and Aline walked through the house in the form of distorted memories, remnants of interrupted lives, echoes of dreams that would never come true. The mansion had already been the setting for other stories of love and fear, and in all of them he seemed to be the common denominator. At some point, his explanation stopped. Silence filled the office with a density that felt almost physical. He watched her, waiting for her reaction. It was as if her very breathing were an answer, as if every change in her gaze were a confession. There were no explicit questions, no demand for forgiveness, only a mute expectation that she would accept the version he'd given. He stepped close enough for Helena to smell the familiar fragrance of scent she associated with safety, with stability, with nights when she had lain beside him believing she was protected from the whole world. Now that same perfume seemed loaded with something else. Confinement, repetition, imposed fate. The mansion vibrated with a silent current. Helena realized she had reached a point from which nothing could ever be as it was before. Even if she chose to believe every word he said, even if she accepted the justification that everything had been done in the name of protection, she could no longer walk through the house's corridors without seeing the hidden layers behind the walls. He was still the man who had given her shelter when everything seemed to be falling apart. But now she knew that, at the same time, he was the man who controlled the rhythm of her life, who decided what she remembered, and what stayed buried. That night, after leaving the office, Helena walked through the mansion as if testing the weight of each new memory. She looked at the objects with different eyes, as if measuring which of them had been placed there to serve her, and which had been placed there to guide her without her noticing. The mirror in the hallway, the arrangement in the hall, the guest room, the attic, everything now was part of a larger choreography. When she lay down, sleep was slow to come. The silence of the house was occasionally broken by distant sounds. But what bothered her most were the noises coming from within, memories shifting, like drawers being opened in a place long closed. At some point during the night, she woke with the clear sensation that someone was standing beside the bed. It wasn't the same fear as on the other night, when the footsteps in the hallway had paralyzed her. This was different. There was a familiarity in that presence, as if part of her knew exactly who was there. And yet the panic was real. Without moving, she kept her eyes shut and let her other senses take over. She felt the air slightly disturbed, the goosebumps rising on her skin, the weight of a gaze just inches from her face. A light, floral perfume different from his brought back a name whispered somewhere in the back of her mind, Valentina. It was impossible to know if that was dream, memory, or something in between, but the feeling was crystal clear. She was not alone. When she finally gathered the courage to open her eyes, she saw no one. The room was empty, bathed in a bluish half-light. Even so, her heart took a long time to slow down. Her mind insisted it had been just a nightmare. The mansion, however, seemed to squeeze her invisible hand and say otherwise. In the days that followed, the tension between them grew in silence. He maintained the same gentle tone, the same gestures of care, the same impeccable routine. But now Helena could see the calculation behind each movement. She noticed when his eyes followed her lingering looks at some object. She noticed when he commented, seemingly casually, on how dangerous the outside world could be. She noticed the discreet attempts to steer the narrative back to gratitude and fear. Little by little, an unbearable truth began to emerge. He could only go on being the protector he claimed to be as long as she remained in the role of the protected. And to do that, he needed her never to fully remember who she had been before him. The next few days seemed to exist in a kind of suspension, a quiet, tense routine, as if every detail of the mansion, every echo, every shadow, every strip of light were under constant scrutiny. Helena moved through the rooms carefully, feeling at once the weight of his watchfulness, and the weight of a growing awareness, as if her mind were finally waking from a long-induced sleep. She tried to act as before, as if nothing had changed. She walked the corridors at predictable times, set the table with the same automatic gestures, prepared afternoon tea with the precision he liked. But inside, something rearranged itself by the minute, opening cracks in everything she believed to be true. One question echoed in her mind like a constant warning. Why did he keep so many parts of her life stored away? And why did those parts look so much like her? The breaking point began with a tiny detail, a drawer. Not from a hidden cabinet, nor from some ancestral attic piece, but from something simple, the bottom drawer of the desk in the second-floor hallway. A drawer Helena had always used to keep irrelevant things, blank notebooks, pens, loose papers, a drawer that deserved no attention. She opened it by chance, on a grey morning while trying to look busy, but when she pulled it a bit harder than necessary, she noticed an unevenness, a false bottom. Helena froze. It took a few seconds before she could bring herself to run her fingers along the smooth surface of the drawer's base. The texture changed at a specific point, a nearly invisible cut. She pushed lightly. A hidden compartment opened, revealing a small bundle of aged papers tied with a pale blue ribbon that contrasted with the dust gathered inside. Her heart started racing. Looking around to make sure she was alone, she took out the bundle and sat on the corridor floor, her back against the wall. The mansion seemed to hold its breath as if it were a silent witness to that moment. Helena untied the ribbon. The papers were old but carefully preserved. There were old bills, receipts, small purchase notes, nothing that, by itself, suggested danger. But then, behind those, she found a more rigid document, folded in four, more worn by time. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was an entry record. A visitor log for the mansion itself, dated many years earlier. The handwriting differed from his more formal, more slanted, likely from some employee or resident of the time. There were names, dates, signatures, and in the middle of them, something that made Helena's breath catch. Her name, written in the same handwriting she had always used, with the same signature, and most disturbing of all, with a date that came long before the day she believed she had first arrived at the mansion. Helena felt the blood drain from her face. It was impossible, completely impossible. The document said she had been at the mansion years before she met that man, years before any conscious memory she had of him, and yet, there it was. Her full name, her recognizable signature, her slanted handwriting, identical to now. She read it over and over, as if trying to find a flaw, a discrepancy, anything that would prove it wasn't hers. But everything was too perfect to be coincidence. Helena touched her own signature with her fingertips, feeling a wave of vertigo. A terrible idea began to form, one she didn't want to admit, that this was not the first chapter of her story with the mansion, or with him. It was as if a thick layer had been stripped from her perception, revealing that her life might be far more circular than linear, that her memory was not a straight line, but a mosaic with pieces torn out, rearranged, and fitted together in convenient ways. What if she had been here before? What if her mind had erased or been made to erase what had really happened? What if what she thought was a beginning was actually a return? The question hit her like a blow. What had she been to this house? What had she been to him? The mansion, silent, seemed to watch her with a somber kind of respect, as if it were giving Helena the chance to understand what, for a long time, it had tried to whisper through the walls, the shadows, the photographs. Everything in her wanted to deny that possibility. But something deeper, almost instinctive, recognized the document, recognized not just the handwriting, but the sensation it evoked, as if the paper carried the scent of a time she had lived and then lost. Helena kept leafing through the papers. She found small handwritten notes, apparently unimportant lists of objects, fragments of phrases, visit notes, but one of them contained something that made her shiver. Prepare the guest room before she arrives. She must not see the attic this time. The date was old, the pronoun was ambiguous, but the combination was devastating. This time, Helena repeated the words silently, as if chewing glass. It confirmed everything her body had already sensed. There was a cycle, there was a repetition, and she had already been part of it. The corridor seemed to narrow around her. The air grew hot, heavy, hard to breathe. The feeling of being trapped in a carefully designed maze ran through her entire body. The shadows around her seemed to gain weight, as if drawing closer to watch her reaction. She slipped the folded document into her dress pocket and pushed the bundle back into the hidden compartment. She needed to think. She needed to connect the dots. She needed to understand what it all meant before he realized she had uncovered yet another hidden fragment. When she stood up, her legs trembled. As she walked toward the end of the hallway, something caught her eye. Her bedroom door, which she had left slightly open, was now closed from the inside, locked. Helena approached slowly, her breath tight. She turned the knob. Nothing, something or someone was in there. In that instant, a draft of cold air swept through the hallway from the opposite direction, as if the mansion were taking a deep breath before speaking. And at that exact moment, Helena heard a sound from the other side of the locked door. Very soft, very delicate. Or the movement of someone walking in silence. Her heart stopped for a second. It wasn't him. Helena knew, her whole body knew. And before she could think, something fell to the floor, a small object pushed from under the door. A black and white photograph. Helena raised a hand to her mouth to stifle an involuntary sound. The girl had the same eye shape, the same slightly defined jawline, the same brow line. You came back. The door remained locked. The silence grew heavier than the air, and in that moment, Helena realized that the past she was trying to reconstruct wasn't just lost, it was alive, and it was inside the house. Helena couldn't sleep that night. The portrait of the girl, that child whose face echoed her own, remained on the nightstand, lit only by the soft glow of moonlight filtering through the curtains. It was a silent recognition, deep and unsettling. The phrase written on the back, "You came back," echoed like a constant reminder that the story Helena believed to be recent was, in truth, far older. Something inside her insisted that this was not just coincidence, it was confirmation. Outside the bedroom, The mansion lay wrapped in attentive silence. Nothing moved in the hallway. But Helena knew, with an uncomfortable certainty, that the locked door had not been the work of the wind, nor of her own hands. Someone had been there, someone who wasn't him. The part he avoided, always kept dark, never mentioned, the basement. But the need to understand who she was, who she had been, was stronger than any fear. She went on. Pinned to the wall with old tacks, forming a sort of mosaic, a visual map of the mansion's past. They were black and white images, sepia tones, some more recent, others so old that the paper looked ready to disintegrate at the slightest touch. Helena stepped closer. The faces in the photographs stared at her from the past. Men with rigid sobriety, women in long dresses, children with serious expressions. But as Helena walked along the wall, something began to repeat. First, she noticed Valentina, then a woman whose name was faded, but whose face had similar features. Then another, and another, 4, 5, 6 women whose features echoed her own in subtle ways. Dark eyes, delicate jawline, arched brows, as if they were all variations of the same form, the same essence replicated across generations. Each of them had disappeared at some point in their lives. Each of them had lived in the mansion, and then Helena saw the last photograph, the smallest of them all. A little girl, the same girl from the picture pushed under her bedroom door, the same gaze, the same lock of hair falling over her forehead, and this time the photo was accompanied by a name, her name, Helena. The date in the lower corner was impossible, far earlier than her birth. She felt her body weaken, the air grew heavy, hard to breathe, the walls around her seemed to close in, as if they wanted to embrace her or suffocate her, she couldn't tell which. For a moment, everything spun. Who was that child? Who was she? The photograph seemed to pulse on the wall, as if it wanted to leap back into the present, as if it were telling Helena, you belong to this, you always have. Her hands trembled as she touched the image. The girl's face was soft, but her eyes held an ancient kind of knowing, an impossible melancholy, as if they knew that that moment, that exact instant, was destined to repeat. Helena didn't know how long she stayed there staring at the photograph. Time seemed to stop existing. The entire mansion seemed to hold its breath with her, and then behind her footsteps, slow, steady, coming down the basement stairs. Helena turned, heart pounding in fear. The flashlight shook in her hand, casting unstable shadows along the walls. But the worst was yet to come. Because the person who appeared in the basement doorway with her face only partially lit was not him. It was a woman, or the shadow of a woman. The silhouette had something familiar about it, something that tugged at Helena's memory from the inside, as if tearing through old hidden threads. The figure stopped at the threshold, not stepping into the room, and for the first time, Helena clearly saw something not quite human in the expression taking form on that face. She didn't smile, she didn't threaten, she just watched. Dark eyes, identical to hers. The figure standing in the basement doorway seemed to absorb what little light came in from the hallway. It was as if the surrounding darkness had its own density, wrapping her in a kind of shapeless veil. Helena felt her whole body go rigid, not because she thought she was looking at a ghost, but because everything in that silhouette was disturbingly familiar. The narrow shoulders, the stiff posture, the outline of the face drawn in shadow. Everything about her cried out for recognition. And when the figure finally spoke, the voice didn't echo like some supernatural whisper. It sounded human, deeply human. Helena. The word came out clear, intimate, full of memory. Helena instinctively backed away, the flashlight trembling in her hand. The beam wavered, throwing jagged shadows across the damp walls. The figure didn't advance, didn't threaten, she just stood there, as if her mere presence were enough to complete the sentence left unspoken. The house seemed to listen, the house seemed to hold its breath. The stuffy basement carried the thick scent of old wood mixed with a very faint perfume Helena recognized from somewhere but couldn't quite place. The figure took a step. The flashlight's beam hit her face for the first time, and Helena felt her stomach twist as if she'd been struck. It wasn't exactly her, but it was almost. The woman standing before her had features so similar to hers that the line between them blurred. Dark eyes, the same brow shape, the same dense, melancholic expression, as if she carried too many memories inside. Her hair was pulled back simply, making the resemblance even more stark. It was like looking at a version of herself displaced in time, a sister who'd never been born, a shadow that had never detached from her, or something much worse. "Do you remember?" the woman asked with a voice that seemed to come from more than one place at once, as if words from different decades overlapped in that single sentence. Helena couldn't answer. Her mouth went dry, her breath short, her fingers locked around the flashlight. The basement seemed to spin slowly, as if the walls were curving toward the center. Who are you?" The question came out weak, almost inaudible. The woman tilted her head slightly, a gesture so identical to Helena's that it made her blood run cold. There was something deeply intimate in that movement, as if they shared a way of existing, a habit adopted before either of them had become conscious. "I'm what you forgot," she replied, taking another step into the room. The flashlight shone directly into her eyes. They did not blink, and yet they were not dead eyes. There was life there. There was pain, there was recognition. Helena took another step back. Her body hit the table full of photographs. The sound of rustling paper echoed through the room. But the woman didn't glance away, as if she were tied to Helena by an invisible thread. "He erased you," the figure went on, "and he erased me, and he erased all of us." The word "us" fell into the basement like a sentence. Helena felt the floor beneath her feet turn fragile. She looked around at the photos of women who looked like her, at the repeated faces, at the dates scattered like pieces of an impossible calendar. There was something in common between all of them, something beyond physical resemblance. They disappeared, they came back. They were erased. "Who are you all?" Helena whispered, though she knew the answer was somehow already inside her. The woman came closer until the flashlight cut across part of her face, revealing the worn lines of a past time had tried and failed to erase. Her expression wasn't angry, it wasn't threatening, it was sad, refusing, a grief so old it no longer knew whether it was grief or identity. "We are you," she said, each word heavier than the last. "We are what you have always been, and what he has always tried to reshape." Helena felt a sharp jolt run through her body. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The woman took another step, and the flashlight revealed something Helena hadn't noticed before. Faint marks on her neck, like the impressions of fingers, not deep cuts, not fresh wounds, but shadows of past violence, long since healed, scars that did not belong to the present. Helena touched her own throat without thinking. Her skin was intact, but somewhere deep inside, she felt a pain she couldn't explain. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You will," the woman said. She raised her hand, as if asking for patience. "The truth isn't just here." She pointed to the photographs. "It's in you, in the loose threads he tried to cut, in the memories that were removed, patched, stitched back together." Helena's head buzzed. Fragmented memories began to rise like bubbles in dark water. A room with light-colored walls, a narrow window with lilac curtains, someone singing softly beside her bed, a hand holding hers, a muffled scream, the metallic smell of something broken, and then darkness. The figure watched Helena waver, as if she could see the memories surfacing and churning inside her. "He did this to all of us," she said, "and every time one of us found out, he erased her, started over, changed names, stories, pasts." The flashlight flickered. The woman stepped closer. "The mansion keeps what he tries to destroy. We are memories of him, but you." She paused, studying Helena with a deep assessing gaze. "You are different. He didn't manage to erase everything." Helena shivered, as if, all at once, every cell in her body began to remember something ancient, something buried so deep it had survived every attempt to be erased. "Why me?" she asked, barely audible. The woman stepped closer until she was only a few paces away. Her voice trembled, but not from fear, from urgency. "Because you were the first." Helena froze, her mind collapsed in silent shock. The first what? The woman took one last step, stopping so close Helena could feel the cold radiating from her skin, a cold that didn't come from the air, but from an existence trapped between remembrance and oblivion. "He keeps trying to recreate you," she went on. "Always you, always the same mold, the same light, the same face. But none of us were exactly you. None of us were you." The light flickered again. The basement seemed to tighten around them. Helena felt her pulse race. Everything made sense and, at the same time, felt impossible. The woman lifted her face, revealing a devastated expression. "You didn't disappear like the others, Helena. He didn't let you die, he erased you, and tried to start over again, and again, and again." The revelation crashed down on Helena like an avalanche. Time split in two. She tried to say something, anything, but no sound came out. The woman lowered her eyes then, as if she felt the weight of a truth piled up over years. "I'm one of the versions he tried to create after you were gone," she whispered. "I'm the mistake he hid. The echo that was never supposed to exist." Helena's throat went dry, and before she could react, before she could even begin to understand what that meant, a sound echoed from above. A sound that cut through the air like a blade. The basement door being opened, heavily with force. He was awake, and he knew exactly where Helena was. The figure in front of her stepped back, not out of fear of him, but as if obeying an old rule, an invisible line that memories could not cross. Her expression turned urgent, almost desperate. "Run!" The sound of him descending the first steps reverberated through the narrow staircase. The figure vanished into the shadows in a movement as quick as it was silence, swallowed by the basement, as if she had never been there. Helena was alone, with the truth burning in her chest, and with the certainty that, in that exact moment, he was already coming for her. His footsteps echoed down the basement stairs with calculated slowness, almost rhythmic, as if each step were a silent warning that there was no escape left. Helena's heart pounded so hard it seemed to vibrate inside her ribs, and the flashlight shook in her hand under the weight of everything she had just learned. She turned toward the wall where the photograph of the child of herself still hung like an open wound in time. That image, those eyes far too deep for such a small girl, seemed to watch her with a mix of pleading and remembrance. A nearly physical sensation pulled her closer, as if that forgotten version of herself were trying to protect her from something she still couldn't understand. But there was no time. The footsteps drew nearer. Helena took 2 steps back, breathing fast, until his shadow appeared at the bend in the stairs. First his shoulders, then his tilted head, and finally his eyes, so calm, so strangely gentle that they seemed incapable of belonging to the man who had created that labyrinth of lives and memories. He stopped when he saw Helena. The weak beam of the flashlight cut the space between them and lit his face. He didn't look furious. He didn't look surprised. He looked defeated, like someone who had finally been caught by the past he had tried to bury. "Helena," he said softly. The tone was the same he used when comforting her, assuring her everything would be all right, wrapping her in a sense of safety. But now, that tone sounded like a mask too delicate to keep standing. She didn't answer. Her throat was too dry, too tight, full of echoes. He stepped off the last stair slowly and looked around, taking in the photographs on the wall as if they were old acquaintances, as if every face there were a story he himself had helped shape. "I knew you would end up here," he said. "Not now, but someday." Helena took a step back, and he raised his hand in a slow gesture, not of threat, but of pleading. "Please, let me explain." She tightened her grip on the flashlight as if that small beam could protect her. "Explain what?" she whispered. "The photos, the women, me, that child." He closed his eyes for a moment, drawing in a deep breath, and, when he opened them again, there was a deep sadness there. "You were never supposed to see this," he murmured. Not the first time, and not now. Helena felt her stomach drop. The first time. The phrase rang against the walls like a cracked bell. Something inside her began to fracture. It wasn't just fear, it was memory, real memory, rising from a crack that had finally opened. He took a step, and Helena instantly backed away. The movement seemed to wound him. You have to understand. He swallowed hard. I didn't do this because I was cruel. I did it because it was the only way to keep you from disappearing. Disappearing, she repeated, her voice breaking. He ran a hand through his hair, disturbed. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked human. Since you were a child, he began. You were different. Too sensitive. The mansion, it touched you in a way it shouldn't. Some people don't survive it. The house sees, chooses, follows, and when it gets attached to someone, it doesn't let go. Helena felt her whole body freeze. The female figure in the basement, the photographs of women so much like her, the presence from the night before, the door that had locked itself. She swallowed. The mansion, she murmured, is not just haunted. No, he replied. It's alive. The word fell heavy between them. And it chose you, he continued. Long before you were born, it sees you as the center of everything. To the house, you are essential. Helena felt her mind reel, and all the other women. The question came out thick with dread. The ones who came before me, were they also chosen? He hesitated. And that hesitation was the clearest answer Helena could have received. You tried to recreate them, she said, her voice fragile but sharp. You tried to make versions of me. You tried to replace what you lost. He went rigid, his shoulders tensed. His gaze drifted for a moment. I tried to save you, he said at last. I tried to take you away from the house. But when you disappeared, when the mansion swallowed you, I tried to bring you back. I tried to repeat what we were, but none of them were you. Helena started to tremble. That little girl, she whispered. I lived here before, as a child. He nodded, finally speaking the truth. The house tried to keep you out of here when you were still little. You don't remember, because I erased it. Because you wouldn't have survived knowing. A loud creak echoed through the wood above them, as if the mansion itself were reacting to the confession. You erased who I was, Helena said, her voice cracking. You erased the child I'd been. You erased what happened here. I did what I had to do, he answered, and for the first time his emotion burst out. You don't know what it's like to be hunted by the house itself. The mansion doesn't accept loss. It doesn't accept change. It clings. It brings back what it wants, and it wants you. The basement seemed to shudder. The air grew denser, colder. Helena saw a shadow move behind the photographs. It wasn't human. It wasn't distinct. It was a darkness with shape, with intent, with eyes far too ancient to belong to any living creature. The mansion, it was watching them. Helena backed up until she hit the table. The flashlight shook, casting trembling light across the walls. He took a step toward her. I did everything to protect you from it, he said. Everything. Maybe I went too far. But I loved you. I loved you every time. Every version. And I won't let the house take you again. But Helena was no longer the woman who believed she was being protected. Now she saw everything. His love was real, but it was a distorted, desperate love. One that had tried to shape her, control her, recreate her, erasing pieces of her mind to keep her within reach. And the mansion. The mansion wasn't just a setting, it was an ancient entity. Solemn, jealous, that had seen something in Helena it never wanted to lose. A louder crash shook the ceiling above them. Dust fell from the beams. The photos on the wall quivered. An invisible pressure swept through the basement like a wind coming from nowhere. He looked around, alarmed. It's waking up, he whispered. Helena's skin tingled. The house wanted her memory back. It wanted her presence back. And perhaps, it wanted something deeper, something fatal. The female figure reappeared behind Helena, silent, as if she were part of the basement, part of the mansion, part of her. It's time, the figure said. The house wants you whole. He heard the voice and went pale. Don't listen to her, he yelled. She's not real. She's what the house creates to pull you back. But Helena knew deep in her soul that there was truth in those eyes, and at the same time, truth in his pain. She was torn between two kinds of love, a dark, obsessive human love, and an ancient, possessive, non-human love, and both believed she belonged to them. The mansion began to shake. The light died completely. The basement plunged into palpable darkness. And then, Helena saw her past. She saw the child she had been. She saw the house calling for her. She saw him carrying her in his arms, fighting against the living walls that tried to hold her. She saw herself grown, returning, confused, fragile. She saw his first attempt to recreate her presence. She saw the failure. She saw every repetition. She saw every face. She saw every cycle. And she understood. The house didn't want to destroy her. It wanted to keep her. It wanted her entire story, all versions of her, all her memories. It wanted to complete her, and he, desperate, had tried to stop it. Helena, his voice echoed in the darkness. Choose. Stay with me. I love you. Helena called the other voice her own voice, coming from the female figure. Come back to yourself. Come back whole. The mansion pulsed, the air vibrated, and then, at the center of absolute darkness, Helena finally remembered who she was. She raised her hand not toward him, nor toward the female figure, but toward herself. Light returned in a silent explosion. The basement vanished. The mansion vanished. He vanished. And for an instant, Helena stood before herself, the girl she had been, the woman she had become, and the shadow that had lived, trapped between broken versions. She touched her own face, and said, with a steady voice, I remember. When she opened her eyes again, she was standing in the hallway of the mansion. The house was still, silent. He was on his knees, crying quietly, defeated not by her, but by the inevitable. Looked him in the eyes. The mansion let out a final sigh, as if it had lost control. Every step returned a piece of herself. The mansion remained forever silent. He had been trying to protect her from herself, because she, in the end, was the only one capable of saving herself. Outside, the night was calm. A gentle breeze brushed her hair, and Helena, finally whole, took a deep breath for the first time in her entire life. The cycle had been broken. And that was how the story ended. Until she discovered